My golden brother stole my girlfriend. A year later, their lives collapsed. Now they're begging me. My name is Steve. I'm 25, and my life went off a cliff exactly a year ago. No warning, no slow unraveling. Just a sudden, brutal plunge, like someone ripped the rug right out from under me. And the person who pushed me over the edge? My older brother, Rick. He was 28 back then, and until that moment, I thought I had him all figured out. He was my brother, for crying out loud. The guy I'd grown up with, the one whose tricks I'd seen 1,000 times. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. Turns out, I had no clue just how far he'd go to get what he wanted. I'd been with Emily for 2 years. 2 solid years of thinking I had it all figured out. I was ready to propose. I'd even picked out the ring, rehearsed the speech, set the whole scene in my head. It was going to be perfect. The quiet dinner, the candles, the heartfelt confession, and then a life together. All that classic nonsense that makes you think you're starring in your own rom-com. But reality's got a way of slapping you awake. And reality had a name. Rick. He was the type of guy who'd waltz in, smile that disarming smile of his, and suddenly, no one in the room could even see me anymore. Emily? She didn't stand a chance. In just 2 weeks, she was wrapped around his finger, hooked by the same eyes that had duped everyone since we were kids. Those eyes that always seemed to say, "Trust me, I'm your hero." Yeah, right. It wasn't like Rick hadn't messed up before. He was always the one getting into messes and making me clean them up. I'd lost count of the times I'd saved him when he screwed up. Like when he borrowed money from the wrong people, missed crucial meetings, or burned bridges with friends. I was the one patching it all together, picking up the pieces of his disasters. But this was different. This time, he didn't just get himself into trouble. He dragged me down with him. I was blindsided, left standing there like a complete idiot as Emily walked out, taking every hope I'd built with her. The emptiness hit hard and fast. Anger settled in like an unwelcome houseguest, growing with every passing day until it filled every corner of my mind. I didn't want to be angry. I wanted to forget, to move on. But something inside me refused to let go. That betrayal burned, searing me from the inside out, until one day, it was like a switch had flipped. The nice guy, the forgiving brother, the Steve who always played it safe, who always bailed everyone out. He was gone. After Emily left, it felt like someone took a bat to my gut and swung with everything they had. But I wasn't about to be the guy who falls apart and drowns in his own misery. Nope, I did what any self-respecting fighter would do. I threw myself into work with a vengeance. No time for moping around, wallowing in heartbreak. The office became my battleground, and I was the soldier who refused to retreat. Mornings blurred into nights as I pushed myself harder than ever, getting to work before dawn and leaving long after everyone else had gone home. Work became my escape, the steady hum of meetings, emails, and deadlines drowning out the chaos in my head. Weeks turned into months, and somewhere along the line, I became a machine. Efficiency was my middle name. No mistakes, no delays, no excuses. I was the top dog, racking up promotions and bonuses while everyone else seemed to be barely keeping their heads above water. I wore my success like armor, even if it felt hollow on the inside. 6 months later, I was the guy, the one everyone relied on to pull through when things got tough. The hero of every project, the go-to guy for last-minute saves. The bosses loved me, my colleagues envied me, but all I felt was numb. And when the office grind wasn't enough, I hit the gym like a madman. The iron weights were my therapy, the only way to exhaust my mind to the point of silence. Every morning started with an hour of relentless lifting, sweat pouring, muscles straining, before I headed off to work to put on the same perfect employee mask. I became a ghost in my own life, avoiding anything that might remind me of what happened. No parties, no catching up with old friends, and definitely no family dinners. I knew the questions would come, about Rick, about Emily, about why I never seemed to show up anymore. It was easier to just disappear. But of course, you can't outrun fate forever. One Saturday, I found myself at the mall, planning to pick up some new sneakers. A little something to freshen up my wardrobe now that I was this successful version of myself. And that's when it happened. There they were, on the first floor by the fountain. Rick and Emily. They were laughing, holding hands, looking like they'd walked straight out of a cheesy romance movie. My breath caught, and for a second, I felt like my chest would split open. But I swallowed the hurt, the anger, the thousand things I wanted to scream, and kept my face blank. Every step past them felt like walking barefoot over broken glass, but I kept my eyes straight ahead, pretending they were just strangers in a crowd. That's when it hit me. I had two choices. Either I keep dragging this weight around, letting them haunt every corner of my mind, or I let them go for good. No more running into memories, no more dwelling on what happened, no more seeing their faces when I closed my eyes at night. I chose the second option. I chose to erase them. Completely, absolutely, and forever. Because that's what survival looked like, even if it meant turning my back on the person I used to be. 6 months after Emily packed her bags and moved in with Rick, the first whispers started to drift back to me. It was almost laughable how the universe kept shoving their drama in my face, as if to make sure I never really forgot. Every time I thought I'd finally moved on, a mutual friend would decide now was the perfect moment to drop the latest gossip. Apparently, their picture-perfect relationship was turning into a mess, collapsing like a sandcastle in the rain. Emily, it seemed, wasn't exactly living the dream she'd imagined. She was complaining to anyone who'd listen that Rick was back to his old antics, the ones that I'd spent years cleaning up. Late-night disappearances, heavy drinking, and partying like he was still a reckless 21-year-old. Me? I played it cool. Every time someone brought up their troubles, I just shrugged like I couldn't care less. "Oh, really? That sucks," I'd say with the kind of detached indifference that made people stop prying. But deep down, each new detail was like fuel to a secret fire. Hearing about Rick stumbling out of bars at 2 in the morning, skipping out on responsibilities and leaving Emily to deal with the aftermath was, well, let's just say I wasn't shedding any tears. It was like watching a bad movie unfold. Predictable, slow-motion chaos, and I had a front-row seat. While their little love story was unraveling, my own life was skyrocketing. Another promotion, another corner office with a killer view, and a salary that made my old paycheck look like pocket change. I finally bought the car I'd always dreamed about, the one I used to joke about when Emily and I were together, imagining it as a someday purchase. Except now, it was parked in my driveway, and that someday had arrived without her. I became the guy everyone noticed. Sharp suits, a watch that probably cost more than Rick's monthly rent, and an aura of confidence that drew people in like moths to a flame. I won't lie, it felt good. Better than good, actually. There was a twisted satisfaction in knowing that while I was pulling myself up, Rick and Emily were sinking fast. Petty? Absolutely. But I wasn't about to lie and play the bigger person. They tore apart my life without a second thought, and now I got to watch their so-called perfect world crumble piece by piece. It was the kind of justice you don't expect to get, and I wasn't going to waste it by pretending I didn't care. Each time I heard about another one of Rick's drunken escapades or Emily's frustrated rants, I'd just smile to myself, the kind of smile you don't let anyone see. It was my own private victory, my tiny slice of revenge, and I savored every moment of it. It was a regular late evening. I was relaxing on the couch with a beer in hand when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. At first, I didn't even want to answer. Figured it was another stupid delivery I hadn't ordered. But the ringing wouldn't stop, so I grumbled and went to see who was so persistent. I opened the door and, honestly, I was ready to see anyone but Emily. She stood there, like a shadow of her former self. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were red, and her face was blotchy from crying. It was a pathetic sight. Before I could say anything, she literally collapsed to her knees like a scene from a cheap melodrama. I didn't even realize what was happening until she started speaking frantically, almost incoherently. "Steve, please. I'm so sorry. I made a huge mistake. Rick, he lied. He took everything. I have nothing left," she gasped, clinging to the hem of my jeans like a drowning person grabbing a straw. Her words spilled out, and the more she spoke, the emptier it all sounded to me. "Yeah, I was looking down at her, literally now. She was on her knees, crying, while I stood there watching like she was a pale ghost from the past that had somehow crawled out of its grave. "You know what's funny?" I said calmly, as if her tears were part of a boring TV show. "I don't care." I felt a strange sense of calm, almost indifference. All her apologies, all her begging meant nothing to me. I was empty, as if every emotion had been burned out of me. I watched her tremble, continuing to babble something about how Rick had lied to her, how he had ruined everything they had. But I wasn't listening. Honestly, I don't even remember what she said. Her words were just white noise to me. I looked at her one last time, nodded toward the closed door, and slammed it right in her face. I wasn't going to listen anymore. This story was ending for me right there. A week after the scene with Emily, the phone rang at midnight. I was just about to go to bed, but of course, someone had to ruin my evening. I picked up the phone, and guess who it was? Rick. His voice was trembling, like he'd barely escaped the end of the world. He sounded like a man on the edge, and I have to admit, it caught my attention. "Steve, please, I really need to see you. Just give me a chance," he mumbled, and I heard him practically crying. Honestly, I almost laughed. But of course, I agreed. As much as I wanted to tell him to go to hell, curiosity got the better of me. We agreed to meet at the old bar on the corner, the one where we used to hang out when we were still real brothers, before all this drama. I walked in, and in the dim neon lights, I saw him in the corner. Rick looked awful. A worn-out t-shirt, unshaven face, bags under his eyes the size of footballs. If I didn't know him, I would have thought he was a bum who'd wandered in to warm up. "Dude, what happened to you?" I asked with a mocking grin, sitting down across from him. He looked up at me, eyes full of desperation, and I immediately knew this was going to be something interesting. "Steve, I'm in deep shit," he started, swallowing nervously. He admitted he was drowning in debt, massive debt he couldn't pay off. Rick looked like he was about to burst into tears, and I actually felt a little sorry for him. Though, who am I kidding? I was enjoying every second of it. It was like watching an old hero fall, thinking he could beat everyone just because he had a cool smile. "I'm serious, Steve," he said, grabbing my sleeve. "You're the only one who can help me. I screwed up, okay? I need you." I looked at his shaking hands and sweaty forehead, and something in me just froze. I felt nothing but cold indifference. This was my brother, the guy I'd always helped, but now his words were just empty noise. Still, I listened to him all the way through, arms crossed and nodding occasionally. Watching him so broken, it was a kind of satisfaction I wasn't going to miss. He was desperate, and it showed in every word, in his trembling voice, in the restless look in his eyes. And I just sat there, watching as he poured out his pitiful story of debts, creditors, and the mistakes he'd made himself. I knew Rick was desperate, so I decided to use it to my full advantage. I offered him a chance, but on my terms. We met again in that same bar. Not that I liked the place, but the atmosphere was perfect. Dusty tables, dim lighting, and the smell of cheap whiskey in the air. I laid out a sheet of paper with a plan in front of him. No, it wasn't some complex financial document. It was a deal with the devil, and I was that devil. "Okay, here's the deal," I began, barely holding back a grin. "You get a shot at digging yourself out of that massive hole you're in, but only if you agree to a few conditions." I could see Rick tensing up, which only encouraged me. He knew I wasn't just sitting here listening to his pathetic excuses for no reason. "First," I said, pointing to the first item on the list, "you give up any claim to the family inheritance. All of it. No more whining, no more, 'I deserve my share.' It's mine. End of story." I saw his jaw clench, but he stayed silent. "Second," I continued, not breaking eye contact, "you stay out of my life. Completely. No more dropping by, no more midnight calls, no more crying on my doorstep. I don't care if the world's ending. You're on your own." Rick tried to argue. "Steve, come on, you can't be serious. That's too much," he started, but I cut him off immediately. "Oh, I'm dead serious, Rick. This is not up for negotiation. Take it or leave it." I crossed my arms and leaned back in the chair, waiting for his response. He tried to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. I could see the inner struggle, but he was already trapped. We sat there, staring at each other, and I knew he was about to give in. In the end, he really had no other choice but to agree. He exhaled, like the last flicker of hope had gone out, and nodded. "Fine. You win, Steve," he muttered, with bitterness in his voice. I just shrugged. This wasn't my victory. It was his defeat. I looked into his eyes, and they were filled with a mix of pain and disappointment. He understood that I was playing by my rules and that he had no other choice. But you know what? It didn't move me. I wasn't going to become his puppet again, dragging him along and solving all his problems. He'd backed himself into this corner, and now he had to play by my rules. Rick started following my plan, and honestly, it was a sight to behold. Every day was pure torture for him, like he was dragging a ton of bricks uphill, trying to climb out of a hole he'd dug himself. The first few weeks he tried to keep a brave face, but it was pathetic. I'd see him at the gym, puffing over the dumbbells, sweat pouring down his face, and I'd walk by with a smirk. "Keep it up, Rick. You're doing great." He'd try to smile back, but it looked so forced that I barely contained my laughter. Every time he failed, and it happened often, I was somewhere nearby to notice. For example, I once stopped by the bank to take care of some business, and there he was at the counter, trying to explain to the clerk why he couldn't make another loan payment. His face was whiter than paper, and his voice trembled. I walked right by, pretending I didn't care at all, but inside, a quiet satisfaction spread. It was like watching dominoes fall, ones he had set up himself. As for Emily, after I refused to help her, she vanished from his life. It was her game over, I guess. She just disappeared, leaving Rick alone in a pile of debt and emotional wreckage. Without her, he turned into a shadow of his former self, and you could see it in his every move. I kept my distance, didn't interfere, but watched from afar as he struggled to stay afloat. Sometimes he'd call me late at night just to say thank you for the help. Funny, right? Like I was his only friend left. I always responded coldly, without emotion. "Sure, don't mention it. Just stick to the plan." He knew I was his last chance, and he was trying his hardest not to mess it up. But he failed over and over again. Once he showed up at my place, pale as a ghost with dark circles under his eyes, asking if he could extend the payment deadline. I just looked at him like he was another street beggar and said, "Rick, you know the deal. No extensions, no exceptions." His face was so desperate, but I wasn't going to be his shoulder to cry on again. I didn't care how many times he fell. I relished every stumble. Emily came back into the picture like a ghost from the past, refusing to let me move on. This time, she wrote me a whole letter, not just a few lines of apologies. No, this was practically a novel. She described all her mistakes with such drama, like she was writing a script for a cheesy soap opera. "I'm so sorry, Steve. I know I messed up, and I can't forgive myself." And it went on for pages. I skimmed it like a boring magazine, with only one thought in my head. Oh, please, just give me a break. All her regret, all those apologies, they didn't stir a single emotion in me. Zero. Nothing. Honestly, I didn't even bother to finish reading. It was too many words, too little substance. I just sighed, set the letter aside, and realized that it had all been over for me for a long time. I was no longer the guy who was willing to forgive everything for one smile. All I felt was a slight irritation that she'd decided to mess with my peace again. And Rick? He kept clawing his way up like a man trying to escape quicksand, but every step only dragged him down further. He stuck to my conditions, knowing that any deviation would be the end for him. He had become the puppet I once was for him, only now the roles were reversed. It was the last favor I was willing to do for him. He deserved the chance to get out, but on my terms, not his. Yeah, I helped him, but it was his last line of credit. I saw him clenching his teeth, trying not to break, but it didn't move me anymore. From that moment on, I was free of their influence, as if I'd shed a heavy chain. They remained trapped by their own choices, their stupid mistakes, and broken illusions. I closed Emily's letter, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash. For me, it was symbolic. All that passed. trash I'd finally thrown away. Now I stood on top, while they stayed somewhere below, in the pit they had dug for themselves.